Governor, and we're here in front of City Hall in New York City to talk about housing and the housing crisis in this city and this state. And I want to talk about two things in particular that none of the other candidates are talking about. They talk about rent control, they talk about affordable housing, but they don't talk about home rule for New York City of its rent regulations, repealing the Erstead law. Instead of having state legislators representing farmers upstate deciding on rent laws down here in New York City. That's number one. Number two, we got to expand public housing. That's the most affordable housing, and it's the most cost-effective to build if we want more affordable housing. So that's what I want to talk about today. Since Governor Cuomo took office in 2010, homelessness has increased 36%. And that's not because more people got personal problems where they can't handle their businesses, can't handle a rent. It's because people can't afford to rent and they're being pushed out. Over 10% of the kids in my city of Syracuse and this city of New York City are homeless when they go to school. And the city's lost 75,000 units of rent-regulated housing since Governor Cuomo came into office. And he knows what he's doing. He was the HUD secretary. And as HUD secretary, they demolished public housing and promised to build mixed income developments, which is a good idea, but they didn't build as many affordable units as they destroyed. So I think the governor's representing his real estate donors, which are giving him millions, not the tenants of this city or this state. And we're in the city under the administration so-called progressive Bill de Blasio, and the rent is going through the roof, and he's doing developer-friendly rezonings, and he's abetting harassment by landlords. We saw that with the 85 Bowery tenants who did a hunger strike out here back in May, which I participated in, fasting with them. And what his policies are doing is driving the working class out of Manhattan, out of much of Brooklyn, out of many parts of the city. People can't afford to live here who work regular jobs, got modest incomes. So, and then we got a couple, they're both Clinton Democrats, de Blasio and Cuomo. And we got two more Clinton Democrats running. Cynthia Nixon, who's challenging Governor Cuomo in the primary. She maxed out for Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders, also gave $5,000 to the Hillary Victory Fund, which collaborated with the DNC to prevent Sanders from having a fair shot at that nomination. And just today, or yesterday, she was up in Albany and she wouldn't commit to running against Cuomo if she lost the Democratic primary on the working families line and left open the door of endorsing Cuomo. So if that happens, working families party people, we feel your pain. We'll be on the ballot. We'll be the last progressive standing in November. But if this is, and then we got Stephanie Miner, my former mayor in Syracuse. And I'm not going to go into detail, but she presided over the gentrification of downtown and developed nothing but upscale housing and destroyed affordable housing in the city of Syracuse. So we have the highest concentration of Black and Latino poverty of any city in the country, fifth highest white poverty, and she made that worse, increasing the race and class segregation. She's a Clinton Democrat, Nixon's a Clinton Democrat, so are Cuomo and de Blasio. And with this housing crisis, they're not getting the job done. It's time for an alternative. So let me also just say, it's not y'all in New York City that's got a problem. Statewide, this is a problem. Over half of New Yorkers pay more than 30% of their income for rent. That's the federal affordability standard, 30%. A quarter of them pay over half of their income for rent. That is unaffordable. And as bad as it is in New York City, the rents are going up through the roof upstate. In fact, Buffalo had the third highest rate inflation last year. Of the big cities in the country, New York City didn't even make the top 25. So, New York City folks, you're having a big problem. We know what you're talking about. I'm from Syracuse, and the rents are too damn high everywhere in the state. So I said at the beginning, we need to repeal the Erstead law. That's the law that has the state legislature deciding what the rent regulations are here in New York City. That needs to be repealed. Cynthia Nixon's calling for universal rent control without a lot of detail, but she's still leaving it in the hands of the state legislature. It's the business of the people of New York City or any city in the state. So what I'm for is having the right of any city, any community to set up rent regulations, but they do it locally. They don't have to go through the state legislature. But rent control is not enough. We need that as an emergency, a stopgap, so people can stay in their homes. But those units that are not regulated in a seller's market, the rents are going to go through the roof, particularly with the kind of upzonings and rezonings that we're doing here in New York City under the de Blasio administration. So what we need to do is expand affordable housing. And the way the state and the city and the federal government, for that matter, have been doing it since the early 70s is giving subsidies to private developers. A lot of these times, these subsidies run out, like the Mitchell-Lama housing or the project-based Section 8 housing. And then it converts to unaffordable housing. And we've got to stop doing that. It's much more cost-effective to directly build public housing. Now, we have a massive need for public housing. That's the one thing the state should do. They give local control over rent regulations, but then what we need to do at the state level is have a circuit breaker, so nobody pays more than 30% of their income for their rent. And the way you do that is a refundable tax credit that you get back at the end of the year. And that would cap it statewide. And then we have local rent regulations. Now, NYCHA needs $32 billion over the next 5 years just to get the lead and the mold out, get the elevators fixed, the boilers fixed, the roofs repaired. That's a lot of money. And nobody's talking about where to get it. We can tax the rich. I'll tell you quickly, because it's not a tax reform news conference, but if we had the same kind of progressive income tax we had in the 1970s, lower rates for the bottom brackets, higher rates for the upper brackets, we'd generate $10 billion more. If we kept the stock transfer tax, that's $15 billion. And if we clawed back the Trump corporate tax cut, except where companies use it to raise wages or create new jobs, that's another $10 billion. That's $35 billion right there for the housing, the subways, all the infrastructure in the state. So the money's there. The top 1% got 12% of all income in New York City in 1980. Today they get 41%, almost quadruple. They can afford to pay some more taxes. So the public housing can be fixed and expanded. The feds are not going to step up. The state needs to step up. And let me just say, Cuomo is not putting money into this. He always points to the city. You pay for it. And then 2 days ago, Cynthia Nixon said she'd try to find $1 billion a year for public housing in addition to what's now being spent. Compared to $32 billion needed for 5 years just to fix the housing, that's not doing the job. So we've got to have a much bigger commitment to public housing. And, you know, people think when they think of public housing, they think of, you know, isolated, concentrated poverty in big high-rise developments. That's not what we're talking about. We want to do it like they do in Europe, where it's mixed income, and so you have professional people, blue-collar, working-class people, poor people all living together. This city has the most segregated housing in the country by both race and class. Different indexes, New York City's in the top 3. That's true upstate, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo. We have a real problem with segregation. So when you mix up the incomes, because the race structure is racialized, the class structure is racialized, you mix up the races too. That's how we begin to desegregate. So when we talk about public housing, we're talking about high quality, scatter site, human scale, and powered by clean energy, yes, as well as mixed income. So it's not just an affordable housing program, it's a jobs program, good jobs building this housing. It's a desegregation program, because we're breaking down the race and class divisions. And it's a clean energy program. So this is something that ought to be popular with the people of the state, be good for the economy. Now, there are particular needs in this state. There are an immediate need for 20,000 units of supportive housing. And this is for people who need on-site services because they have a history of substance abuse, or they have mental or physical needs, and they need on-site services. And 20,000 units would take care of that in the state. The state should provide that. Right now, we've deinstitutionalized, say, mental health people. They get in the criminal justice system, and then they're not getting served in the prison system. It's crazy. And then there are 90,000 homeless people statewide, and public housing is the best way to house those people. Now, Governor Cuomo announced a $5 billion, 5-year, $20 billion program in 2016, but he's only released a few $100 million for it. He hasn't put it in the budget, and that's a problem. You know, the need is here now, and the people that need it don't have it, and Cuomo does a news conference and then doesn't follow through. So most of that has not been funded to date. Another thing we need to do is expand tenant rights. we need a just cause eviction law, so these landlords can't use these loopholes like vacancy decontrol and major capital improvements and preferential rents and others to get tenants out, or just straight up harass them like they did to the 85 Bowery tenants. And so the tenants then have protection, security in their tenure, and then if it goes to housing court, a lot of people can't afford a lawyer. There should be public provision of lawyers when people go to housing court so they can have a good defense of their interests. And that means we need to increase funding for the New York State Division of Housing and Community Renewal. And let me just say, in closing, even though I would be governor, I can't not speak about the housing crisis here and talk about what I'm hearing from tenant groups in this city about what Mayor de Blasio is doing to their neighborhoods with his rezonings. It is upzoning, mostly in low-income, people of color communities, downzoning in affluent white communities. So they're bringing in these high-rises, which not only increase the density and concentration in those neighborhoods, but they tend to be luxury apartments, so the surrounding rents go up. And then their definition of affordability under their quote-unquote inclusionary zoning is the area median income, which includes Westchester and Long Island. And that is out of reach for many New Yorkers who are working class. You have to have at least $50,000 income to get into some of the most affordable units in this so-called inclusionary zoning. His policies are giving inclusionary zoning, which is a good idea, a bad name. And the other problem with raising the heights in places like Chinatown is it creates environmental problems, because the sewers are actually backing up or overflowing when it rains. And then the air and light. I was talking to somebody last night in Brooklyn. They're building high-rises near the botanical gardens, which is going to keep them out of the sunlight for many hours during the day. It is bad planning. And the problem is the communities are not making these plans. It's coming from the top down. So I'm for community control of rezoning. So thank you for your time. And with that, anybody have any questions? Well, nobody has any questions, so I'm going to go in there and talk to the media that didn't show up, and thanks for listening. So I think this thing turned off halfway through.
Yeah, I don't know if I got anything on mine. I can't see anything.
Did y'all hear that? I don't think so. This thing turned off.